GameSci.com. GameSci.com.
Hi ho, it's off to work we go. I'm Professor Chris Ferguson, and welcome to iframes, a web page within a web page, kind of like TV picture within a picture. We've all seen those big TV sets. You can pop up another channel in the corner of the set and see what's on the other channel while still viewing the main page. Well, it's the same idea. I can have a web page with a sub-web page within it. That's what an iframe is. The key to understanding an iframe and JavaScript is objects. There's a reason the last few lessons placed emphasis on what is an object. Use an object to run a method or a function. Use an object to access or change a property or variable. It's a pattern. Once you learn the pattern, once you can spot the objects and the methods and the properties within your JavaScript code, you can start to understand iframes because they are very similar to code we've already written. The window object, the document object, and iframe object. The window object is basically the browser window the main page is rendered on. The document object, or DOM, within the window points to all the HTML elements displayed, and each of those elements is an object in the DOM. The iframe object is simply another window object which has its own document object. So everything we learned about the window object and the document object will apply to an iframe object, because an iframe object is a window object. Set up a simple web page. This is our main web page. It has many HTML tags on it. It'll display in the browser window. When a web page is loaded, JavaScript automatically creates the window object. Notice how the arrow points to the entire browser window. Here's my window object, and it's pointing to my browser window, which is displaying my web page. Inside the window object, a document object is created. Notice how the arrow points to only the HTML tags on the page. The reason it is called the document object model, or DOM, is every HTML tag is represented by an object in the DOM. So the window object has part of it, the .document object. The .document object is pointing to the HTML objects. Each tag gets its own HTML object. If I had 50 HTML tags, I'd be pointing to 50 HTML objects in the DOM. Now add an iframe, a web page within the main web page. iframe ID equals page 2 name equals page 2. We'll explain that shortly. I want the width to be 100% of the window it's on, and I want a frame border of size 1 around it. I'm going to stretch it all the way across the screen and put a little line around it so you can clearly see where the iframe is. When a page 2 iframe is created, it builds a page 2 window object inside the main window object. Notice how the page 2 arrow points to the outer edge of the iframe. Window has within it a document object. We all know that. It now also has a page 2 object because we named it page 2. Window has a .page 2 object. And look what it's pointing to. It's pointing to the iframe, the edge of the iframe. It's basically another window object within the main window object. Inside of page 2, it builds a different document object. Notice how the arrow points to the HTML tags DOM for the web page loaded into the page 2 iframe. Page 2 is a window object, so it also has a document object, and its document object will be pointing to the HTML tags inside the iframe. The main window document points to the HTML tags on the main web page. The page 2 document object points to the HTML tags inside the iframe. It makes perfect sense. If I have 2 web pages loaded, I have 2 window objects. They're called window and page 2. And I have 2 document objects, window.document and page 2.document. Since they're both window objects, they both have a document object within it. Page 2.document.write IMESPN. Compare it to window.document.write IMCNN. To prove that page 2 and the window object have two different document objects inside of them, I will page2.document.write to display to the iframe window, and I will window.documentWrite to display to the main window. Go to the page2 variable. Inside of it, go to its document object. Inside its document object, write the string IMESPN, and you can see it shows up in the page2 iframe. This is very similar than if I went to the window object and I said go to its document object, which is every HTML tag on the main page, and I write IMCNN to that web page. I can't stress enough, I have two web pages loaded, so I have two document objects. That's all I'm trying to illustrate here. Two web pages loaded, two document objects. Page2.location equals https espn.com. Here's the picture-in-picture thing that I was telling you about. I'm changing the channel on the second web page. To prove page 2 is a window object, use the page2.location property to display espn.com on the iframe. So I went to the page 2 variable and I said change your location to ESPN, and it will rewrite what's on this web page and display espn.com on that web page. I could put a bunch of links on the main web page, and each link could change the channel to a different web page. Notice the window.location equals. Now I put this line of code last because this will overwrite the whole browser window, but you've seen this before. You could go to the window object, tell it to change its location to CNN, and it will go to a different web page. Well, the line above it is just doing the same thing for that web page within the web page. So I can change it to ESPN. I could change it to ABC.com. I could change it to TikTok.com. I can change it to any web page I want to display on the internal iframe. Here's a special case. If the code inside the iframe wishes to change or access something on the main web page, it can use the special variable parent to access the main page. If you use parent dot inside the code of the iframe, you're really saying you want to go access the main page's window object. Parent dot in the iframe is the same thing as the main page window dot. Just like the main page can change the iframe can turn around and change the main page. Now the one thing I regret on this slide is I used document.write. I would have liked to done, get element by ID and change the inner HTML, but that would have took a really long line of code. So I kind of shortened this example. It's a little shorter than I wanted, but hopefully you're getting the idea. And also make sure you read the lecture. I can go into much more detail in the larger format of the lecture. But really what I want you to understand is once you understand objects, then you can understand how JavaScript can do the exact same things in almost the exact same way in an iframe as it can in the main browser window. The iframe, the only thing we're really learning new here is the iframe tag. Once we create the iframe tag and understand that page 2 is another window object, everything we learned about the window object and the document object works the same. You want to call getElementById and change an element dynamically? Feel free to do page2.document.getElementById and change something dynamically on the iframe window. Next up, jQuery. What is jQuery? It's a third-party library you add to your code. It's not built in. It's the opposite of built in. Remember, the window and the document object are built in. You don't have to do anything to use them. They're already part of the language. jQuery is definitely an alien. It has to be brought into your code in order to use it. What is jQuery? What is jQuery? jQuery is a fast, small, and feature-rich JavaScript library. It makes things like HTML document traversal and manipulation, event handling, animation, and AJAX much simpler with an easy-to-use API that works across a multitude of browsers. Don't ask me, ask jQuery.com. This is a sentence right from the top of jQuery.com. Why use jQuery? Number one, it's cross-platform. It works across all major web browsers, including mobile phones. You don't need to test your code on 20 different browser configurations when you use jQuery. Number 2, do more with less code. jQuery programs tend to be more compact than if you tried to do the same thing writing out the JavaScript yourself. Add the jQuery user interface UI module for very fancy, dynamic, good-looking, and interactive web pages. Every fancy web page you've ever used is probably jQuery or some other third-party library. It takes a lot of code to do these fancy animations you see on a lot of websites, and jQuery makes that a lot easier. First up, let's look at something we already know, the script tag with the source equals student.js. When added to your HTML, it says load all the variables and functions and anything else from the student.js file in the same directory as my HTML file. The reason we do it this way is so we can use the same JavaScript code on many different web pages. You've done this for every lab so far. Include the student.js code into my web page. This is option number 1. Download and copy jQuery to your server. Here is what third-party JavaScript library means. You are the first party. You wrote student.js and you added it to your web page. The creators of JavaScript are the second party. They wrote the window object, the document object, etc., and built them into the language. A third party wrote jQuery, and we need to add their code to our web page. Script source equals jQuery.min.js. This is very similar to this line right up here. This one adds student.js. This one's adding jQuery.js. Go to the website https://jQuery.com, find and download the version of jQuery that you want, copy that to your server in the same folder as your HTML file, then add and use the JavaScript in jQuery, just like you add and use the code in student.js. The .min means it is a compressed file. It'll use less memory and a faster download. On these third-party libraries, you always want the compressed version so it loads faster and uses less memory. The only way you can do this is if you have this file in the same directory as your student.js file and your index.html file. Option number 2, load jQuery from a Google server. You don't have to download jQuery to your computer and put it on your host. You can use Google. Google hosts several versions of jQuery. If you provide a source equal with a valid URL, it will load JavaScript from any server on the internet. Just be careful you trust that server, and of course we trust Google. Now both options for loading jQuery have advantages and disadvantages. Pick the one you like. With jQuery loaded, we can now use it on our web page. So what I'm going to do is create a script tag with a type of JavaScript, and I'm going out to ajax.googleapis.com, and I'm loading jQuery from their server. That's what I'm doing. I don't have to download it. I don't have to upload it to my server. I'm just saying go out to Google and grab that version of jQuery off of their server. You don't have to do both. You don't have to do it like this and this. You'll only have to pick one option. Once again, I'm going to start by showing you code that we've already done. This is not jQuery. Window.location equals https espn.com. Or I can just type in location equals https espn.com. I don't have to write out the longer versions. Both of these lines do the exact same thing. They go to the window object, they access the location property, and they change it to ESPN. Since window dot would appear on most lines, JavaScript made a practical decision to assume the window dot and allow programmers to type the shorter versions location equals instead of window dot location equals. It's a convenient. I can type less code and get the same result. Let's do it a second time. Object equals window.document.getElementById. by ID. Get me the element with ID equal news set. I don't have to type the window dot if I don't want to. I can just say object equals document.getElementById and pass it news. Both lines do the same thing, but the window dot is not required, which is good. The document object is used a lot. The DOM contains an object for every HTML tag on the page. Extract the one with the ID equal news and assign it to the variable object. It's just a convenience. JavaScript allows you to type in a shorter command so you don't have to type in window dot in front of everything. Now let's look at some jQuery. jQuery, pass it the document object .ready. Instead of typing that out fully, I'm going to type in $document.ready. Turns out both of these lines do the same thing. The first line explicitly calls the jQuery function and passes it the DOM. It then calls the jQuery method ready. But every line of jQuery would have to type in jQuery in front of it, so they made an alias called $, and we can type the shorter $sign version instead of the longer jQuery version. Go back up to here. They didn't make us type in window dot all the time. We could just say location equals. We didn't have to type window dot document. We can just say document. That's just a little thing that JavaScript does so we can type in shorter code. The $, while it confuses new jQuery programmers all the time, like what is $? All it is a shorter version of the jQuery function. Instead of having to type the word jQuery over and over and over again, I can type one character $, and it will call the jQuery functions. That's what an alias means. Whenever you see a $, call the jQuery function. JQObject equals jQuery, parentheses, $news, end of parentheses. What am I doing here? Well, first of all, jQuery is the longer version. I can do the exact same thing by doing jQuery object equals $parentheses, $news, end of parentheses. What I'm doing is calling the jQuery function, and I can use the $sign instead of typing out the full command jQuery. These two lines are the same, but it's shorter and easy to type in $, open and close parentheses, to call the jQuery function. $news is how jQuery locates and returns the object in the DOM with an ID equal news. Now, I'm not sure if it's the exact same object getElementById returns, but jQuery's versions of the object with the ID. Basically, what's happening here is this line of code here is doing the same thing that this line of code is doing. This is saying go to the document, get me the element with the news ID, and assign it here. This is saying go to the jQuery, which holds the document, get me that same element, the one with news ID, and assign it to this object right there. The thing you have to get used to with jQuery is just the different format, the different way to call a function using an alias $. Once you get that, it's the same thing as before. These are just objects, properties, and methods that you have to understand. Once you can start looking at jQuery code and identify what's the object, what's a method, what's a property, then you can master jQuery. Let's look at a more complete example all in one screen. We're going to say script source equals jQuery.min.js. This is required. In order to use jQuery, you must include the jQuery code on each page. This adds the jQuery function to your page so you can call jQuery and pass it the document object. This also sets up the $sign alias, so the shorter call $document is the exact same thing. It includes all the objects, properties, and methods that jQuery uses. This is how you add the third-party library to your program. Once you've added it, you can start using it on your page. This is not jQuery. Body onload equals the load event. When this web page finishes loading, call this function load event. Recall from the lesson on event-driven programming, the onload attribute will not trigger and run load event until all the HTML elements are rendered and the DOM is fully populated with objects for each of those objects. It turns out $document.ready is exactly the same thing. The jQuery function runs automatically after the DOM is loaded because it needs those objects. So this line of code here and this line of code here are going to be very, very similar in what they do. Wait till the page is fully loaded and then execute this method or execute this function. Again, not jQuery. Div ID equals my div, click me. A simple div. I needed an element on the web page I can manipulate with jQuery. It could have been any element. A paragraph, a headline, it doesn't matter. It could have been any element. It is the ID equals my div that is important because that is what jQuery will use to find and access this element. The ID equals is just one way jQuery can access an element or object on the page. There are other ways, including using the CSS class name. I go over all those different ways in the lecture portion of this lesson. Now this is jQuery. $document is calling the jQuery function and passing it the document object, the DOM. Once it's built that, it'll call the ready method and execute this parameter that it's been sent. This is the jQuery code. It is event driven. It runs after the web page is fully rendered and the DOM has an object for each HTML tag on the page. This is so jQuery can access those objects. jQuery needs the document object in order to manipulate the things on the web page. The ready parameter is an anonymous or callback function. This parameter, what's in between this parentheses and that parentheses, this is the parameter to the ready method. In the lower red box, this curly brace here in the lower red box is the closing curly brace for this open right here in the upper red box. And this closing parentheses in the lower red box is the match for this open parentheses, the one just after the word ready. This anonymous function is executed when the ready method runs. When ready executes, this function runs. $parentheses # my div dot click and I pass it another anonymous function. jQuery is very event driven. If you don't understand the lesson on event driven, you'll struggle with jQuery. $parentheses # my div is jQuery accessing the element with the ID equal my div. Basically, it's doing the same thing as a document.get element by ID passing it my div. For that object, call the click method and tell it when you are clicked, run this anonymous function. Basically, it's the same as adding an onClick function attribute to the div tag above. I can go up here to this div tag and say onClick execute something. Well, that's the same thing we're doing here. On click of this div, call this function. Watch the lower box. Look at the curly brace and the closing parentheses in that lower brace. This curly brace in the lower box matches this open curly brace up here in the upper red box. This parentheses, closed parentheses in the lower red box matches this open parentheses in the upper red box. I gotta admit, it's a strange formatting. It took me a little while. I had to read it 3 or 4 times to start figuring it out. How jQuery is structured and how it's written. It is a different format for writing the code, but in the end, it still comes out to this is an object, this is a method, this is a property. $parentheses # my div dot HTML parentheses you clicked me. This is event-driven code. When the user clicks on the element with ID equal my div, and only then will this code execute. $parentheses # my div is jQuery accessing the element with the ID equal my div. For that object, call HTML method and tell it to change what it displays to you clicked me. When I click on this div up here, right there, it's going to change this wording inside the div to you clicked me. This is the jQuery equivalent of doing this in standard JavaScript. We've seen this code before. Document.getElementById mydiv.innerHTML equals you clicked me. Well, this line of code in the red box is doing this exact same thing. jQuery isn't new. It's just making some of the stuff we did in JavaScript easier with shorter code to do the same thing. If you really want to build a fancy website, if you write all your JavaScript yourself, it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort. By including jQuery, you can get the same features built into the page faster with a smaller amount of code. That wraps up this slide and this lesson's video. This is a very simple example of a jQuery program. I need short code so it fits on the slide. jQuery can do a lot more. Google jQuery or jQuery examples. Also read the lecture. I can do a lot more detail and show longer examples in the lecture. Finally, remember jQuery has been tested on a wide variety of browsers. If you get your jQuery page looking nice on your system, it most likely looks nice on all browsers, even on a cell phone screen. That is a big advantage of jQuery. They test, so you don't have to. Well, thank you for watching the video in this lesson. Have a good day, and we'll see you on the next lesson. Adios.